You know, living in West Texas, we've heard plenty about the Roswell mysteries, the Marfa lights, Area 51. But did you know 70 years ago today, we had our own sighting of what some considered objects under intelligent control? August 25th, 1951. It's a Saturday night in Lubbock, so a few Texas Tech professors decide to get together at one of their houses and hang out. After some casual talk about astronomy, they head outside a little before 9:30, and then it happens. And while we don't know if it happened this dramatically, the men look up and see what they say were about 20 to 30 objects as bright as stars flying above them twice, heading south. That same night, Pat Allgood told us in a 2003 interview that she was at a drive-in movie when she saw something very similar.
We are sitting there watching the movie, obviously, and all of a sudden my dad and I saw these lights coming over the screen. It was just a formation of lights about the size of, maybe a little bit smaller than a frisbee.
A few days later, on August 30th, Carl Hart Jr., who was a freshman at Texas Tech, was getting ready to head to bed when he says a V-shaped formation of lights flew over him.
Grabbed my camera and set the exposure on where I wanted it and ran back outside and waited, and then, two more flights came over. I think I got 2 pictures of one and 3 of the other. When I first processed them, I didn't think I had a thing until I really examined them closely.
Hart took his pictures to the Avalanche Journal, who at first was hesitant, but eventually published them. The shots eventually making it all the way to Life magazine. Those 3 tech professors, so sure what they saw were not meteors, contacted the Air Force.
We're not talking about the flying saucer lunatic fringe here or something. We're talking about professional people who were apparently impressed enough by having seen strange things in the sky to go out and try to observe them under scientific conditions.
I think the important thing to remember is that they weren't the ones who suggested that the Lubbock lights were aliens. That came from other people in the community. They just described what they saw and explained why they thought it wasn't something that they naturally understood.
In declassified military documents obtained by KLBK, both the professors and young Carl Hart were interrogated multiple times about the sightings as part of the government's Project Grudge investigation led by Lieutenant Edward Ruppelt.
They went over and over, my story, and I guess trying to catch me and being inconsistent, but apparently they were satisfied eventually.
When investigators determined that Hart's pictures weren't a hoax, these documents revealed that they checked with nearby bases like Reese to confirm if the lights were some sort of secret military aircraft or missiles. Well, they weren't those either, and that's when the Air Force concluded that what had been seen in Lubbock the week of August 25th were birds, or specifically plovers that were reflecting newly installed street lights. According to the declassified documents, investigators met with the federal game warden about their theory. He doubted they were birds because plovers weren't that prevalent in the Lubbock area at that time of year. Even biology experts agreed with that, saying the objects not only were way too big to be birds, but they were moving too fast. When we spoke to Donald Burleson, a retired professor from Roswell over 20 years ago, his thinking was in the same category as theirs.
Very clearly, this imaging shows that these are not birds.
But 70 years later, we now know that's a story the Air Force has decided to stick by: migratory birds heading south. Current Texas Tech professor Tom Macaron says knowing what he does about West Texas, he wouldn't rule out that theory, but even if they weren't birds, he says some things are just simply unknown.
People talk about UFOs, and often, I think in the popular culture, the phrase UFO has been associated with aliens, but it really just stands for unidentified flying object. And many kinds of unidentified flying objects are things that are just normal, natural phenomena, but we don't understand what they are well enough based on the kinds of observations that we have of them.
And Terry, while doing research for this 70th anniversary, I found out that a few years after the Project Grudge investigation, which was later known as Project Blue Book, Lieutenant Edward Ruppelt, who we mentioned earlier, wrote a book. And in his book, he says that he knew that those objects were not birds. He also said that he knew those objects were not UFOs either.
So what did he say they were?
He just said that the mystery continues on. And that's what we'll stick by, the mystery.
I am glad, we
continues on.
mentioned Reese Air Force Base, because at that time, it was open and operational, and, a lot of the UFO stories that you hear about
Out of there,
are
yeah.
close to military bases.
Right,
So
right.
that's very interesting that they touched on that, but definitely not birds. They don't make a perfect circle or reflect off of street lights.
It would seem like a stretch for
It
that
would.
to reflect off lights. But that's
So what did you decide they were?
unidentified flying objects.
Okay, we're
That's
going
what
to
I'm
stick with
sticking
UFO. All right, thanks so much, Matt.